and welcome to the Library Loudhailer, the monthly podcast of the National Library of New Zealand Te Puna Mātauranga or Aotearoa. My name is Mary Hay, and together with Sean McMahon we'll be sharing some of the unique voices and stories from our library staff and collections. Today we're talking to Paul Diamond, one of the curators of the Pūkana exhibition, on now at the National Library and running until 23rd of May 2020.
Kia ora, Paul. You have a very intriguing title for this exhibition, Pūkana, Te Ihi Tuihi Tiwana, Moments in Māori Performance. Can you elaborate a little further on what Pūkana means?
What Pūkana is an element of Māori performance, and it's where the performer's eyes sort of look down and sideways, but the head stays stationary. And it's a sort of a really unusual feature of Māori performance, and so we thought that would be a great way into this idea of celebrating Māori performance, going from that original brief from Chris CK. One of the challenges with the exhibition was it's potentially so broad, and as soon as people knew we were thinking about this, they said, oh, what about Mark Williams? What about Billy T. James? What about, all these people, George Hinari? And how would we sort of encompass, the story of Māori show bands, the Māori involved in opera, all of these different art forms? But then I thought, well, moments is kind of a way of doing that, because if we're telling us story about moments in Māori performance, then that we're not sort of trying to tell the story of every moment. Really, the origin of the idea for the exhibition came from my boss, Chris CK, who's the chief librarian at the Turnbull Library, and I was actually away from the library studying in Germany, and he emailed me in May 2018 and asked about if I'd be interested in being involved in the curation for this exhibition idea that he had, which was, his initial idea was to draw on photographic collections in the library to focus on Māori achievement and performance. And he was also interested in Te Reo Māori coming through as a theme in that. And then it sort of grew from there, was sort of adopted as an idea of one of these two exhibitions marking the centenary of the Alexander Turnbull Library.
One of the things I find most striking when I go into the exhibition space is the curator that you have there in a large encased box, and I know they have come from Te Papa online especially for this, and it's the collection that strikes you straight away when you walk in, and I know that's part of your theme on the Hei Te Tanga origin stories. And I'd like to ask you a bit more about that, because I know in your catalogue and your captions you've talked about them as being wooden toys maybe, or wooden sort of artefacts that have been regarded that way by some people, but they have other functions in that. And when I looked at them closely, they are a wooden carving, exquisitely carved, a full-face moko, and the arms move on strings. And looking at them, they look so much more spiritual than a toy, and you've said they can be used for spiritual matters, for instruction sometimes. And I was wondering if you could just elaborate more on that, because it's very powerful.
When we were researching the exhibition quite early on, and when I knew I was working with Ariana and Vicky Ann said, what about curator? And I didn't even know what they were. I knew vaguely that they were puppets. They sort of get translated as puppets. And there was one curator that Vicky Ann knew of from when she'd worked at Te Papa, and it's one that we have ended up loaning, and it was from a collection called the Oldman Collection that this collector in England put together, and then the New Zealand government bought it in the 1940s. So practically nothing's known about that one. It's a very striking figure. But when we went to see that at Te Papa, we asked if we could see all of their curator, and they've got one that was made for Alexander Turnbull, and that's the other one that we've got in the exhibition. And that was really interesting, because this is an exhibition about the centenary of Turnbull's bequest to the country. So it was a chance to sort of acknowledge that story as well. And Alexander Turnbull commissioned that via Elsden Best, who'd done a lot of work and was living in the Tūhoe area. And the curator actually has on the back of it Ruatahuna, where Best was living. And we've got the correspondence from Turnbull to Best, asking him to ask the natives, as he calls them, to make this selection of Māori things, and there's a karitau there for 10 shillings. So once we started looking at these, we realised that they are linked into one of these foundational stories for Māori, but that have performance at the heart of it. And in a nutshell, it's about a group of women who set off to identify someone who'd killed the pet whale that belonged to their chief. And the women didn't know what the man looked like, but they knew he had a double tooth. And if they performed, they could get him to smile. So they did all of these different things. They did waiata and haka, they played taonga poro, and they used karitau. So there's sort of multiple reasons why we were interested in these, because this group of women is the first kapahaka team ever. Okay. It's that old, and there are versions of this story all through the Pacific. It's not just a Māori story, so that shows how old it is. And people have asked me, like, well, were these karitau based on European marionettes or puppets? Possibly not, because, if they feature in these stories that are unbelievably old, and they specifically talk about karitau, there's quite a lot of detail about the particular songs that were used with them. So Elsden Best, the reason it's interesting that he's connected with Turnbull's karitau is that Elsden Best is what people rely on for their ideas of Māori culture and history. And so in one of his books, he talks about these as being child's toys, which is kind of part of the story, but we kept hearing about and reading about other meanings of these. And they can be used for instruction, like for haka, which was interesting to us because we thought, well, this is for an exhibition about performance. But there's also this idea of them kind of embodying an ancestor, a person. And, there's all sorts of reasons why you might want to do that, good and bad reasons. So they have a certain kind of power. And to be honest, initially I was a little bit wary of working with them because I felt a little bit out of my depth. Over time, and that's what is good about having a long time period to build up to an exhibition, is that I was able to get a bit more comfort about it. And we have really good support, from our collection care people, and we've got a brilliant registrar here, Amy Crosgrove, who used to work at Te Papa, and she brokered the whole process with Te Papa, which is, it's just like when we loan things, it's quite a process. There's all sorts of things that have to be worked out. And actually a beautiful moment was when we went to the Te Papa store. This was the second time I saw the karitau, and this was to meet with the curator, it was to meet with their registrar, their mount maker, and their collection manager. And I thought, and there was also input from the conservators. And I was like, do all of these people really need to be here? But actually we did, because it was about making it tika and safe, actually, as a process in terms of respect for these taonga and the beautiful job the mount maker has done at Te Papa. So, and that was all like stuff I'd never done before. But that's a bit of a background to why they're there and how they came to be there.
We talked earlier about creating an exhibition. You talked about it's about creating an argument or having a big idea. And I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about what the argument or the big idea is at the core of this exhibition.
Well, when I've had to think about the other exhibitions that I've done, there was a quote that caught my eye from Nicholas Sirota, who used to be the director of the Tate Gallery in London. And he said museums should offer a series of arguments rather than simply a collection of pictures. And I guess that's that idea of tension, that there's some sort of conflict, I guess, between, and it's very deliberate, the why you've chosen to place things together. One of the it wasn't cups of tea actually. It was Pilsner sessions with some curatorial colleagues at another institution in town, and because I wanted to rack their brains, and they're both very highly regarded curators. And one said to me, "Well, what's the proposition, and what's at stake?" And when we thought about what's at stake, well, actually, the exhibiting function in this library is at stake, because you always have to make a case for it, because we're a research. We have these collections. And we share them with the world through research, and we share them online. But I would argue that it's important that we share them through exhibition as well. So that's what it was doing. I think one of the other arguments is, I wanted to challenge people's ideas about performance. And you see, I got challenged by Ariana about the way I was thinking about haka. And I really appreciated that, because it really did make me stop and ask, well, hang on, what are the other ways you can see these collections? But one of the big arguments in this exhibition is that performance always has a purpose. It can seem a bit random and fun, but even in the fun entertainment whakanaho performances, there's a sort of a purpose. There will be a purpose. So it might be grieving, a response to grief, something horrendous that's happened, or it might be to seduce someone. It might be to get back at someone. It's always got a purpose. And I don't know, maybe that's obvious, but I think it's different to the way performance works in, say, the Pākehā world. So that's a bit about sort of some of the underlying arguments.
I really like that.
So you mentioned the Pākehā world there, so do you have an ideal audience for the exhibition?
Everybody who puts on an exhibition, I think, sort of says, oh, it's for everybody.
No!
But really, again, the other part of the brief from the boss was that this have particular appeal to young Māori, 15 to 35, which was a real challenge for someone who's just turned 50 at that time, it was me. But also we didn't want to alienate our traditional audiences, who are really valuable and are the backbone of the way this library works. So it was how to bring that group in, and I'm interested in trying to change the culture of this place so that group keep coming here, because the people who come to us all the time, it didn't happen by magic. It didn't sort of come out of the sky. They were brought here as kids. They kind of developed that habit of the Turnbull Library being a place that you went to for things that were important to you. So we had kids from my old school, Taita College, have helped us with this exhibition. They performed at the airport to promote the exhibition. They performed at the opening. They've performed here a lot. I'm hopeful that they will be able to come and use us. Actually, they don't even have to visit us to use us. They can use us online, but that they become habitual, familiar users of the library. So I guess I have sort of, been influenced by that brief. And it can come down to the people that you see, because if you don't see people like you in these places, well, then you might think, well, maybe this place isn't for me. When Selina Tusitala-Marsh, who's just finished her term as the Poet Laureate, was here in Taita College, we're here supporting that as well. I think someone from another group said, that when they were first asked to do something with her, they really didn't feel like it was their space, but then she gave them the confidence to do that. And I guess it's important to have role models, and I guess the three of us fronting this are, that we sort of show that, this is a place you might want to work, or this is, there are people, all sorts of people in these places.
You are here, you're represented here. Yeah.
So, as I say, it's a bit of a stretch when you're as old as I am to try and understand where 15 to 35-year-olds are at. Well, that's why it was good. Ariana's a parent as well. So occasionally we'd have our little test audience and she'd get kids to look at text or ideas that we had. But I think that's a key thing. I think it's about sort of growing the audience that come to the library.
And certainly Alien Weaponry is in this show. You've got a video of that band. They are very much in that demographic, but also shaking up thrash metal and how te reo may be used in music.
Well, Alien Weaponry are a fascinating phenomenon for the country. And as I've, the two brothers in that group came through the Māori language immersion system. They went to Kohanga and Kura Kaupapa Māori. Now, I don't think we ever thought that the kids from there, we might have thought, they'll go to Matatini and they'll do kapahaka. I don't think they ever thought they would do thrash metal and Māori and have Danish audiences learning haka and answering them back. I think this is amazing for this country. It is great that it's that younger voice, but I think it's like one of those watershed moments, like when the anthem was sung in Māori at Twickenham, and people thought the sky was going to fall, but now we sing it in Māori first anyway. All of us do. I think it's a huge leap forward in terms of the profile of Māori performance in the world. And also another idea in this exhibition is that Māori performance represents New Zealand. And there's a woman called Marianne Schultz who I'd come across when I was a researcher, and she's done a really fantastic PhD which became a book about Māori performance. And one of her arguments is that things like the haka, when the All Blacks do the haka, that represents New Zealand. And she's right, it's transcended, what do they call it, a posture dance. It is a symbol of New Zealand, like the koru on the Air New Zealand plane or the kiwi. So that's the other interesting thing about performance. But what these three young guys are doing is completely challenging the idea of what that is, that you can be Māori, because you're singing in your own language, you're singing in the language of this country, but you're singing it in that form. And I'm probably the last person who'd ever be interested in heavy metal. But when I started listening to this stuff, I couldn't get over how clever it was. And it was so really, really good, the way they use English and Māori. Their videos are great. So it wasn't too hard to, include them as part of this. And it gave us a lovely kind of endpoint. You've got that ancient legend, from the beginning of time right through to this, which is happening at the moment.
Fantastic. As you go through this show, your themes have an area, and so for the visitors coming in, they go through the show, they'll see one of your areas and go on to the next, and they're all quite discreet, they're all captioned. You've got the video in one room where you can go in and hear the music and the interviews. You go right around and you end up with Arns Westra, the famous New Zealand documentary photographer, at the end. You're left with these wonderful photographs from the 1963 from Arns. One's from the Whakatutu school in Gisborne. And the way Arns was shooting was on a medium format camera, which was shooting from the hip. So it's 12 shots per reel, and that you're printed off the contact sheet. So you can see these 12 shots on the contact sheets. You've got 2 of them, and then you've blown them up massively onto the wall. So you get this visual sensation of seeing the order she shot them, but you also get this microscopic detail of what's in the photos. And I noticed from the performance in the school that there's poi, so there's a lot of poi going on, but also they're singing. So one lad's got a broomstick with an Edmunds baking tin can, which is his mic. And then there's drums, these little sort of old style sort of tambourine type drums, which they're beating on. And very animated. And she's captured, going back to the Te Iti, Te Wehi, Te Wana, in that, because everyone's performing and they're all kids. And you get that sense coming right back at you.
Yeah, so we get the sense. Yeah, it's the whole experience, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, that's the brilliance of, Arns Westra's photography, is that she's got this amazing ability to capture that sort of sense of vitality. And this exhibition is driven by collections, and one of the collections we were aware of was Arns's collection of her negatives, which have been digitised, but still not really that well known. And when we looked through them, we thought, well, there's quite a lot of images of performance in this collection, because when Arns sort of got herself into places where she could photograph Māori, often there was performance, and it kind of reinforced our idea that performance is sort of at the heart of Māori culture. You don't really have to look very hard in her collection to find examples. So we thought a way in to do that would be to look at 2 of the famous images of performance, which is one of women doing kupi kupi at the coronation commemorations at Ngāroa here at Tūranga Waiwai Marae, and the one you've mentioned about the school children near Gisborne. So actually in that classroom, what I didn't know till I looked at the proof sheets is, the kids on the left are doing poi, the girls are doing poi, but the boys have got their band with the Edmunds baking tin and other things on the right. So Arns is kind of moving between the 2, but she sort of zooms in on those boys. But I just love the way Arns captures life, the vitality of life, and it's, most of those images are from a 60 to 63, a very short period of time, but there's all that stuff going on. But that stuff's always going on. It's going on in a different way now, and it's probably been captured on phones, not cameras. But that's, our mihi to her. It's just the most extraordinary, beautiful collection that she was generous enough to donate here, and that that's just one example of the many, many, many donors who entrust us with their collections.
You've given us a quote here from Arns when you were talking to her about the exhibition, which you've actually used in the caption. But I would love to see this exhibition dance, make people smile. I feel that we need that just now. All that talent amongst Māori, let's celebrate. And that's what you feel at the end of this exhibition.
Well, that's really gratifying. And I think Arns got what we were trying to do, you know, taking that original idea of Chris's to sort of celebrate Māori performance. And Natalie Marshall, our photo curator, arranged for us to meet with Arns and her sister Yvonne, who does the printing and the preparation of Arns's images, and David Alsop, the gallerist. And we explained to Arns what we were trying to do, and she just got it. And in fact, she didn't just get it, she actually gave us a spur. She inspired us, because it was sort of reassuring to think, yeah, I think we are on the right track here. There is something here. And yeah, so it's really lazy, really, grabbing other people's quotes for your text. But I just thought it was a beautiful, beautiful quote. And she was really chuffed that we used it.
So the themes, the 14 themes that have been developed from this overarching vision for the exhibition, and how has that manifested itself through the selection of items?
Well, it was a process. It was like a wānanga process. They talk about this being a form of how Māori discuss things, and that's where you get together and part of the process is that people have a chance to contribute and give their feedback. And some of those sessions would be, for me, you know, great moments for me in the development of this. It's the working alongside the two other curators, and also Peter Ireland, and also Neil Partington, and others as well. And what happened with that was the distillation of the ideas into this. It's like a conceptual framework, really, and it made it much easier for us, because really everything people would throw at us, we could say, well, that's where it kind of relates. And also it gave us the chance to have the interconnections, which I think is another exciting thing. So things like the film Once We Were Warriors, for example, pop up right through the exhibition, because we were aware it was a big anniversary of that. But rather than having, you know, a section looking at Once We Were Warriors, you actually see the story, and you see, you know, like the screenwriter, Riwia Brown, her siblings were also involved in key Māori bits of the history of Māori performance. So it's not really a chronological structure, and it's not really, you know, breaking performance into sort of types and things. It's actually a more integrated structure. And yeah, but it did take a process to get there, and that's the value of working with a team. And we worked really well together as a team, because I think the fact that we all felt comfortable, and actually that meant comfortable about disagreeing. And the other two, and Peter and Neil, have very different ways of looking at collections to me. But that was really valuable, I think, with where we ended up.
Is there do you have a favourite theme in the exhibition?
No. I guess
no favourite child?
No, I was just relieved we got them.
So I have a theme that I'm quite interested in, and it's the performance and grief theme. And then there's three very powerful pictures hanging on the wall talking about performance and grief. And one of them is the photo of Nikisha Kingi and Azaria Thompson. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about that.
A thing that happened to us was that as part of our research process, you know, the attacks and terrorist attacks in Christchurch happened, and that meant that the spotlight went on haka and the aftermath of that, and how those were performed by school children and others. And that made us think about performance in that context of grief. So, you know, Tangihanga, which is a really amazing institution in the Māori world, has all sorts of elements of performance in it. So that we'd already been thinking of how that we needed to acknowledge that, but this made it even more important. But what was great about this was that we looked at the coverage, we looked at the, you know, things on YouTube, the clips of overseas media, you know, the film footage of that. And Ariana's from Christchurch as well, so understands quite a lot of the context, and it's then can point out things like that. The haka that the kids were doing was the haka composed after Christchurch, the Christchurch earthquakes. So another experience of trauma being used to respond to a different experience of trauma. But what was interesting about this process of thinking about that image and how to tell the story of what happened in Christchurch in Pūkana was that it really illustrated another theme in the exhibition, Mai Te Ātia, the camera on the shore, which basically in a nutshell is challenging ourselves to try and show the collections of the Toombul from Māori perspectives. Because overwhelmingly the collections of the Toombul are not collected by Māori. They're of Māori, but they're often other people observing what Māori are doing. So we had to write an article about the exhibition for the Off the Record, and I was keen to sort of angle it on, isn't it amazing how, what the BBC and the Guardian are saying about haka, and what started off as a aggressive sort of, what they called it, a war dance, is now used to express unity and grief. And Ariana said, well, rather than doing that, what are those kids? What did those kids think about what they were doing, and who were those kids? And so I said, well, you're from Christchurch, try and find that.
Find out.
And we knew we could see their school uniforms, Burnside High and Christchurch Girls. So she activated her. She's a good social media person, and we found out, that it's Nakisha Kingi and Azaria Thompson, and more importantly, from Ariana's point of view, was that they were okay about the photo being used. So that's another thing about processes. We, in a legal sense, we just had to get approval from Associated Press. We paid a fee. But for Ariana, there was a whole other ethical dimension to this, that she wanted those girls to be comfortable.
So can you tell us something about the team behind it? You would have had to bring in a big team to be able to deal with all of the design, project management, selection of items.
I guess that it's a way I work, and all the sort of work I do at the library is sort of collaborative, and I get a lot of inspiration and ideas from people. And when Chris suggested that there be a sort of a curatorial team, I was keen on that, and it ended up being me as lead curator and Ariana Tsikau as another curator, and Vicky Ann Hakel. And what's brilliant about that was that, it's a big exhibition, it's a big space, and I'd done exhibitions here before, but only in the small Toombul Gallery, which is a much smaller space, and the challenge there is almost you usually have too much for that space, whereas this was, how are we going to tell the stories of Māori performance in this big space? Another reason why it was great working with those two is that Ariana is research librarian Māori here. We started about the same time, but she's also a musician, and she's a composer and a performer, and knows a lot about taonga puoro, and has amazing connections throughout the Māori performing world. And then Vicky Ann Hakel runs the National Preservation Office in our Outreach Services section, but she's also a playwright and has great connections in Māori theatre and other bits of among Māori performers. And she's also got very clear ideas about how the Māori theatre that we know now, where that sort of came from. So it was lovely working with those two. And then the other person who really was like a team member was Peter Ireland, who's our gallery specialist, who's been at the library since it opened in 1987. And the gallery was part of the library in a different place when the library opened, and he's been involved with every exhibition that we've had since then. And he's got an extraordinary experience. And also that he's had this experience of working with different curators, which I think gives him a lovely patience and empathy in helping people tell their stories. And at crucial moments, he would say or do things or make suggestions that were just absolutely crucial. So there was that team, and then Neil Partington, who's a designer, came on board as well. But actually he came on board to help us as a project manager for the delivery of the exhibition in the gallery, which was really good for me because it meant that I could focus on the content and the curation. And like Peter, Neil's hugely experienced. He's done lots of work with us and other places. And Actually, working with him is like a lesson in why design matters and how design can help you tell the stories you want to tell.
Okay, so we are getting down towards the end of the show now, Paul. So we'd like to end this interview by literally giving you the opportunity to have the very last word.
So if I had to select a word, it's a pretty simple, humble word, but it's a word I think that I always come back to in my work at the Turnbull Library, and it's connecting, or connections. And I think it's just part of the way I work, whatever I'm doing. I'm always interested in the interconnections, for example, between the collections, but also between the staff. And the number of times in our tea room, I'll bump into Mary Hay or Emerson Vandy or something and get an idea for how what we're doing connects with what someone else is doing. And it is just the way I work. And in the curation of Pūkana, there was a lot of sort of information and inspiration and ideas that came from other people. But it's also interesting to me to build the knowledge of the collections so that you can make those connections. And that's what I think we've tried to do in Pūkana as well. But yeah, connections and connecting.
Ka whai, kia ora.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul.
Well, that's it for this episode of the Library Loudhailer. Thanks again to Paul Diamond for coming in and talking to us about Pūkana. And a shout out to our sound engineer Jay Busenberg and our producer Aaron Wanoa. And to you, most of all, our wonderful audience. Join us again next month for more audio stories from the library. You can find details for each episode in the show notes available on the National Library website. Due to the global pandemic and recent national lockdown, the Pūkana exhibition closing date has now been extended until the 30th of July 2020. So, if you're in Wellington, we hope you'll visit the National Library to see this wonderful exhibition for yourself. You can also hear Paul give a guided audio tour of the exhibition on our website under the heading Pūkana Curators Talk. To see us out, we have a very special live recording. This is the Taita College Potty Group performing Kōtero Mārie from the opening ceremony of the Pūkana exhibition on the 16th of September 2019. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. Ka kite anō.